This is a tremendous conference. I'm so glad to be here for my first time, and I'm hoping to come back every year. Thank you so much for the invitation. We've got a great panel for you here today. 4 people, 3 of whom I know very well for many years, and I've just met Derek. They have tremendous life experiences and insights to share with you about building a globally fluent workplace. Rather than me introducing them individually, which would be a great pleasure because I could sing their praises, I thought it would be better to have them tell you about themselves, in their own words, their stories, and weave into that how Chinese has been useful to them or it has been useful to those that they know. We're going to do this not boy, girl, boy, girl. It's going to be alphabetical by last name. So Amy is our first speaker. She's a principal at the Albright Stonebridge Group in Washington, D.C., which is one of the leading consulting operations in the country. And Amy is an old friend. Tell us your story.
Thanks so much, John. It's such an honor to be here. I first started studying Chinese in the fall of 1987, and I wish that Yao Laoshi could see me here today talking to all of you about the fact that Chinese has continued to be a part of my career for more than 30 years, in fact. I was introduced to China in a small high school in Connecticut, and decided after one semester taking a class on Chinese history and one semester Soviet history that I was going to go to college and study Chinese. And my career has never really taken me far from China, although it's taken me to China repeatedly. And when I think about what I'm doing today, which is at Albright Stonebridge Group, as John said, it's a small consulting firm founded by Madeleine Albright and Sandy Berger. We are helping mainly American entities, but some other foreign entities operate in global markets, and I run our China practice in Washington, D.C., and try to translate China for corporations and nonprofits and industry associations. And of course, my language training, my years living in China as an American diplomat, in Beijing and Shanghai, and then as a trade negotiator at the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, really have helped me with this translation work, not just the language, but the exposure that I've had to China through so many different opportunities. And again, I come back to Yao Laoshi in my story and saying, the first probably half of my career, every job that I got was as a result of having taken the time to study Chinese, to live in China, to be exposed to Chinese culture. And so that started when I was first in Washington, D.C., after having lived in China for 4 years and serving as a bilingual assistant to the Chinese representative from the People's Bank of China at the International Monetary Fund. At that time, and this was in 1995, this representative did not speak English. The representative in that job today has a PhD from UC Santa Cruz in economics, and so that's, I think, a nice vignette of how much China has become more international in just over 20 years as well. But I was hired because I could speak Chinese to him and help him edit in English things that he would have to say at the International Monetary Fund's board. And just having that exposure then made me think about going back to school, continuing to study Chinese, and when I finished graduate school, entering the State Department and working on China-North Korea relations, hired because of my Chinese capabilities. And I was sitting in my secure facility. I was working on intelligence work when the U.S. Consul General in Shanghai called me and said, "Do you really speak Chinese, Taliko?" And when I said, "Yes, sir, I do," he said, "I'm going to move you from your secure location on the 8th floor of the State Department to Shanghai because we're very focused on China joining the World Trade Organization, and we need people who speak Chinese to work with Chinese government officials on how to come into compliance with those commitments. And so I spent 3 years in Shanghai doing that work. Again and again and again after that time, I was hired in different places because of my exposure to China. Today, running the China practice at Albright Stonebridge Group, I recruit people who speak Chinese, who have exposure to China, who understand the China of today that I frankly don't, sitting in Washington, D.C. And so I know my introduction's been too long, but I just want to thank all of you for the work that you're doing, exposing the next generation of Americans to China and to Chinese, because I think it's going to help them throughout their whole lives.
Thanks, Amy. You know, last night, Linda Liu mentioned that there's an estimate that there are 395,000 jobs seeking people who speak Chinese in the United States. That number is an estimate. I don't know if it's right, but what I know for certain is that 10 years from now, we have no idea what that number is going to be. And part of the job of leaders and teachers is to imagine jobs in the future that are going to use Chinese. So there's you've had your story. I never thought that beginning studying Chinese in 1971 would lead me to be an interpreter for National Geographic in 1981 in China. So there's lots of surprises along the road. Derek Miller is the president of the World Trade Center here in Utah. He's spent 10 years in Washington, D.C. He's been the chief of staff to the governor. He sits atop an organization that looks at all of the issues, not just Chinese language, related to the state of Utah's global competitiveness in business. So, Derek, love to hear from you, your perspective.
Thank you, John. It's good to be with all of you. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this panel. I think my distinction on this panel is I'm the token one who doesn't speak Chinese. Is that right? In fact, when I came in, the panelist joking with me said, "We're going to do the panel in Chinese. Are you okay with that?" In fact, I may be the only one in the room that doesn't speak Chinese as I think about it. Although in Utah we do have a lot of Chinese speakers, throughout our moderated discussion here, I'll get into some of those details. But let me, in case you don't already know why, Utah has so many Chinese speakers as well as second language speakers. There are more second languages spoken in Utah than any other state. That has to do primarily with the Mormon missionary program. And I mention that because what I probably am in this room, singular, is the only Flemish speaker. Are there any other Flemish speakers? So 25 years ago, I served a Mormon mission in northern Belgium and learned Flemish. So I'll teach you Flemish and you all can teach me Chinese. As John referenced, the World Trade Center Utah is an organization that promotes Utah and promotes around the globe, as well as promotes international business in Utah. And of course, one of the things we promote is language ability, and we talk a lot about our dual immersion Chinese language programs. Again, we'll get into some of those details in a moment. But I wanted to, just in the 2 minutes that I have, give you a broad brush about what is happening in Utah, specifically related to international business and specifically to this topic of building a globally fluent workforce. I can tell you, and it may surprise you, that in Utah, international business is big business. We are an export state. We are a trade surplus state. Although we are a state of only 3 million people, we recognize that we have to grow our markets globally, and we take advantage of the opportunities and the competences that we have in the state, including foreign language ability, to the extent that today Utah is the 6th fastest growing export economy in the United States of America. And I have to tell you, it's pretty remarkable to be a state of only 3 million people located in the middle of the Rocky Mountains. Most people probably couldn't find on a map without a little bit of help. But to be the 6th fastest, and by the way, in case you didn't know, I know not all of you are from Utah, we don't have a seaport, and the Great Salt Lake doesn't count. Those ships just go around in a circle. It doesn't do anything for our exports or for our imports. But for a state like that to be the sixth fastest growing export economy is really a testament to our thousands of businesses, 85% of which are small businesses, that they do exactly what a global economy requires them to do, which is to get out into the marketplace, to compete and to win. And so just as a backdrop, I would just share that with you. I look forward to getting into some of the details.
Thank you, Derek. So does this international workforce here in Utah, does that attract businesses to come in from outside?
It does. In fact, in a previous career, I worked for Governor John Huntsman, who you probably know was the ambassador to China and speaks fluent Mandarin. And when John Huntsman was the governor of the state of Utah, I helped to run his Office of Economic Development. When we would recruit, one of my job duties was recruiting companies to Utah. So just as one example, Goldman Sachs has its second largest North American office in Salt Lake City, just down the street here. So you can walk 2 blocks to the north and find the Goldman Sachs building, second largest in North America, fourth largest worldwide. And I had the opportunity to work with them when we were recruiting them to the state of Utah. And the language ability, the fact that any one of their customers could come or call, either visit or call, and to have someone who speaks the more than 130 languages that are spoken in daily commerce in Utah was a great value to them.
Fantastic. Matt Salmon is an old friend. We first met when he was in Congress in the 1990s. I used to go from Beijing to lobby Congress on MFN for China. Matt's been a 5-term congressman from Arizona on 2 different occasions, and now he's the Arizona State University is very lucky to have him in a senior role there. Matt, tell us your experience. You are a Chinese speaker.
That's right. I learned it kind of inadvertently because, as Derek said, I was one of those Mormon missionaries. Right after high school, I went to BYU for a semester, was deeply in love with the girl that dumped me when I left on my mission. But I got my call to go to Taiwan, and I hadn't studied any foreign language in high school. But at that time, one of the things that was done before mission calls were issued was you had to take a language aptitude test to see, how well you could do in language. I think they just felt really sorry for me, but they sent me to Taiwan, and at that time, the language training mission for Chinese language was in Provo, Utah, right by Brigham Young University. And I got there on a Wednesday night, and by Sunday, we were forbidden to speak English anymore. That was called Silent Sunday. And we did a lot of pointing and grunting, but my teachers were not only Mandarin speakers, but they were Chinese. And they were phenomenal teachers. And I wanted when they were giving out the Chinese names, I begged for the name Li Xiaolong, but they wouldn't give it to me. Because I was a big Bruce Lee fan back then. But they gave me a different name. Anyway, I served from 1977 to 79 in Taiwan. And what's really interesting is that in our mission, our mission president told us that even when we were off duty, we were to still speak Chinese. We even prayed in Mandarin. And so after 6 months, it was funny because I was dreaming in Mandarin. And I look in the mirror and I half expected somebody different to be looking at me. When I came back, I ended up going to Arizona State University and getting my bachelor's degree, which was in English literature. My minor was in Chinese studies. And then went on to Brigham Young University and got my master's in public administration. But I got elected to the U.S. Congress in the 90s. And because I was the only Mandarin speaker in all of Congress at the time, it thrust me into a front seat position on the Foreign Affairs Committee, which I was appointed to have a strong building relationship with China. And right after I got elected, I went with the speaker over to China and was able to hold my press conference in Mandarin, which everybody got kind of a kick out of. and was able to build a lot of strong relationships. Anyway, when I left the first time from Congress, I joined a big international public affairs company called APCO Worldwide.
Sure.
And we had multiple offices in China. And one of the really cool things that I got to do, I'll never forget this my whole life, was one of the NBA's recruiters was working on recruiting Chinese basketball players. And I got to go over and negotiate Yao Ming's contract into the NBA.
Wow.
I spent 6 weeks with Yao Ming, one of the most wonderful individuals I've ever met, polite, thoughtful. I don't know if you knew, but his parents also played professional basketball in China as well. All three of them were much, much taller than me. I felt very, very small, but it was a great experience. And then when I went back to Congress again in 2012, I became the chairman of the Asia-Pacific Subcommittee, and I believe I'm the first chairman of the Asia-Pacific Subcommittee on Foreign Affairs in the history of America that actually spoke Mandarin Chinese, which opened up some really great opportunities. So my message to you is if the students learn Mandarin, they can be a congressman.
Or negotiate contracts for Yao Ming.
or negotiate contracts for Yao Ming.
Well, and the presidency is not too far away. So that should be our goal. Matt, did you had something to share with us?
I do, because I know one of the things that we wanted to talk about is what kinds of opportunities are there? Why should somebody study Mandarin? And I do have a little video, very short one, just 3 minutes. At Arizona State University, we also have a flagship program. But I believe very, very strongly that those students that have an interdisciplinary take on education, that not only learn Mandarin, but also become proficient in another field, maybe engineering or chemistry or medicine or any number of degrees, you have the world by the tail. And our flagship program works with the Department of Defense to help Mandarin speakers not only learn Mandarin, but become proficient in their field of study in the Mandarin language. And if I could cue that up, I'd really appreciate it.
Jacob Black. I'm a philosophy major and a Chinese major here at ASU.
My name is Sydney. I am a sophomore here at ASU. I'm studying civil engineering with an environmental focus.
I'm Sam. I'm a sophomore here at ASU and in my second year in the flagship program.
My name is Samantha Sanders. I'm a Chinese major. I have a certificate in Korean studies. I'm a Barrett Honors student.
My name is Zach Marin. I'm majoring in genetics, cell and developmental biology, and Chinese. I'm a student at Barrett Honors College.
My name is Emery Tamaiko. I'm majoring in anthropology and Chinese to the ASU Chinese Flagship Program.
The flagship program is so unique because it offers students the ability to go abroad and really immerse themselves fully in the language and the culture of China. Domestically, you're able to participate in events on campus or throughout the area, and they also offer you aid with advising and tutoring to really bring your Chinese level up to the highest potential possibility.
There's a lot of summer programs, and there's a ton of things that you can do even after flagship with the capstone year. So flagship just provides you with a lot of the opportunities that you might not have otherwise.
After college, I will commission into the military as a second lieutenant. However, after my time in the military, I would like to either work for the government or work for an international business. And so I know that this skill of being professionally proficient in Chinese will help me to further myself and achieve my goals both personally and professionally.
I want to be a foreign service officer, so with the help of Flagship, I was able to secure funding to study abroad for over a year in both Beijing and Shanghai. And while I was there, I got to participate in internships and different programs and meet a lot of native people who were able to help my Chinese cultural and linguistic fluency just go to the next level. It was a great opportunity and a great experience.
The reputation of flagship students as hard workers helped me to secure an internship with Goldman Sachs, which represented my first true step away from genetics and into the business world. As a result of those experiences, I confirmed my passion for strategy consulting and was able to leverage those relationships that I had created both abroad and domestically via the flagship program to secure a full-time position here in the United States with a management consulting firm.
During my capstone year, I interned with Ealing Press, a leading publisher of foreign literature in China. At one point, I was assigned the individual translation of an entire nonfiction book on the history of the Shanghai Jewish refugees during World War II. After I completed my internship, Bridge 21 offered me a position as a freelance editor and translator, and that's where I currently work. So if it wasn't for Flagship, I wouldn't have the job I have now.
That's great. Thank you, Matt. Thank you for sharing that. Yes, I've been to the flagship program at ASU. I went there to recruit students for Beida. Yeah, it's a great program. You might think that before, as I introduced Wen-Shi, who used to work for Goldman Sachs, you might start to think that there's a conspiracy here that Goldman Sachs is in everything. But Wen-Shi works in a senior position at VIP Kid, which she'll tell you about in a moment. VIP Kid is a company that is fast-growing and that teaches English to Chinese students in China using American teachers here. And its subsidiary LingoBus does the same thing in reverse for American kids learning Chinese. But Wen-Shi has had a very interesting career in government, outside of government. We first met in Beijing. Wen-Shi, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much for inviting me to join this, panel. I think my experience is a little bit different. And when John invited me to join the panel, I actually feel a little bit embarrassed in the sense that I didn't make an effort to study Chinese. In fact, I just grew up speaking Chinese. So that's the advantage that I have. But I think, how to leverage that advantage for my own career and development. I think that's something I like to share with everyone because it has played a huge role in my career. When I also used to work in the government in the State Department, and partially I was able to work on a lot of exciting work at that time, US-China, Asia-related things, because I speak the language. And language is just a tool, I would say. It's a tool of understanding the culture, the society, the communication, what the others are thinking about. So that kind of understanding is critical to not just doing international affairs, foreign policy work, but also in the business world, right? Today, we're living in a world that is so interconnected. How do you communicate with people who may not grow up as your neighbors? I think that's critical to my own success as well as, the community and these countries. And so moving from the government to my private sector job, which was with Goldman Sachs, so I ran Goldman's philanthropy in Asia, was also, I would say, partially due to my ability to communicate well with stakeholders there. And then, leading to my current position, which I actually feel passionate about because after serving in the government in one of the, I would say, biggest investment banks in the world, I have this just deep, commitment, I would say, to promoting cross-cultural and cross-country understanding because I saw at firsthand how misunderstanding and miscommunication could really lead to bad decision-making, whether it's at the highest level foreign policy or at the daily sort of, people-to-people level. I saw that a lot of wrong business decision-making or judgments were due to misunderstanding, and that's also because of lack of language and the ability to communicate. That's why I joined VIP Kid, which is an online education company that connects primarily Americans and Chinese. We use the very innovative online platform to provide job opportunities to American teachers to teach English during their spare time to Chinese students who are interested in learning English, and vice versa. So this business model has been really, really successful and popular. So I'm just going to play a quick video so you know how that works. The Lingo Bus video.
遇见 Lingo Bus 在线少儿中文教育平台的那一刻，他心中的热情被点燃。白天工作，晚上教外国小朋友学习中文，这是一种神奇而开心的体验。
你好 ，William， 我叫于曼。
你好
，William 说：“你好，豆豆。”
你好，豆豆。
我们唱：你好，你好，
你好，你好。
去北京，
去北京。
William 很好。
Lingo Bus.
Yeah, so
that's a great thing to have your kid doing in his room as opposed to some other things.
Yes.
On an iPad.
Yeah.
And so you can make learning Mandarin as fun, as young as I think it should be, because I think a lot of people still have this perception that learning Mandarin or Chinese is such a hard thing. You only do that if you're like A students or something. But if we start when kids are young and then make it a fun part of their life, they'll grow up thinking about it differently.
So you're interested in cross-cultural, cross-country communications and so on, and language is a big part of that. Are there some ways that you've seen people who maybe didn't have the language skills but still had managed to understand something about the country where they've been able to be successful as a cross-cultural communicator?
I mean, definitely. I mean, before I moved back to the US, I lived in China for 3+ years. I mean, not as long as John or some of you. And what I see was there were a lot of expats living in China, especially in Shanghai. I think, it's so easy for you to live there without even speaking too much Mandarin Chinese. I think the key is that you don't have to be fluent in speaking one language, in this case, Chinese, in order to survive, obviously. But if you want to thrive in that community, or if you want to really connect and understand, and everyone is different. I've seen that, some people are making such an effort to study Mandarin in order to understand the local culture, and, I think that's great. And I've also seen people who don't have to do that, but still thrive in doing business. It really depends on your individual interests. But I would advocate that language is a very, 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 very important tool in opening your understanding and your window to the world. Because the language itself, the thinking, the logics, and everything behind why the language is spoken in certain way, is something that unless you understand it, unless you go through that process, you wouldn't be able to really, grasp what the other culture is thinking about.
Learning any language causes you to challenge some of the assumptions that you have about thinking and about ways of doing things. Learning languages teaches you to be empathetic to others and creates that skill that's valuable. So just tell you a little bit more about the China Careers Summit that we're doing in a couple of weeks in DC. We've put together a 2-day program of panels and keynote speakers. We have over 40 people from different walks of life. Jeff Wong is graciously agreed to come and share his experience with our students. But the range of fields of jobs that you can find with Chinese language, where Chinese language and understanding of China is useful, it's really enormous. You obviously have people in the U.S. government, in different agencies, in defense, and NSA, and CIA, State Department. You have all of those, but you have the consultancies that are in D.C., APCO, where Matt used to work. Kroll is looking for people. They're going to be recruiting at this event. And then you have other areas. You have the entertainment business. And you even have people whose Chinese is so good that they can get on stage and make a living, like Dashan, right? Everybody knows Dashan from Canada. Amazing Chinese speaker. Jesse Appel is another example of people like that. And you have entertainers who've gone to China, including basketball players who've learned Chinese in the other direction. So there's a lot of things to do, and we're only just beginning to scratch the surface. So let's have a conversation. I'm going to ask the panelists if you have any questions for each other. They weren't expecting that. I didn't tee that up.
I have a question.
Okay. Derek.
So, let me give just the background for the question, the 30-second background. So in Utah, we have a very robust dual immersion program, not just with Mandarin Chinese, but with other languages as well. But on any given day, 13,000 school kids are going to their dual immersion in over 120 different schools and spending half the day learning their subjects in Mandarin Chinese. And that was done intentionally, to give them that opportunity. This first cohort, this started, by the way, 10 years ago. We have our state senator who started the program, Howard Stevenson, who's here, and we have him to thank for it. So thank you, Howard, for having that vision to create that program. They are now that first cohort is now just entering high school. And so we are faced with a new challenge and a new opportunity, which is how within high school do we start to prepare them to use their language ability as they get out of high school, into college, and then out of college. So that's my question for the panelists, because you all deal with this on the workforce level. I deal with it, and I see it mostly in that K through 12 level. How can Utah take the program that we have and help those students to prepare for the next level?
All right, fellow panelists, ideas.
I'm going to go back to what I said in my opening line, is that I think it's incredibly important, besides learning another language, to also become an expert in a given field. Because I think when you combine the language with your expertise in a given field, you just have so much more opportunity.
I agree with that. I think that my generation of having some language skills is simply not enough, and I know that because I'm recruiting fluent Chinese speakers at Albright Stonebridge Group, and I want them also to have experience having worked for the U.S. government or having lived in China and worked in a specific industry, because that's what our clients need. It's not just about translation of words. It's about understanding of different parts of our economies. And so, back to your question, it's incredible to me that your students can then go to university and immediately be a summer intern at an Albright Stonebridge Group, which I studied Latin and Greek in high school. I didn't start Mandarin until I was a freshman in college, and my Chinese, I'm sure, will never be as good as some of these students that you are training because they're starting so young. But I would encourage your students to think about, once they're in university, over the summer, use their language, either by going to China or coming to Washington, D.C., and working for a firm like Albright Stonebridge Group that literally does put people to work trying to help us understand things happening in China in Chinese, but to an English-speaking audience. I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
It's a great idea. I think we can also consider some kind of a program for high school kids that introduces them to the world of work. Some children at that age are not yet fully thinking about careers, but maybe their parents are. And that might be something worth considering. So Matt, when you've been looking at this for a long time, and you've run across many people with China backgrounds in different fields. How do you see this evolving going forward? The U.S.-China relationship right now is in a somewhat precarious position, but looking over the horizon, where do you see this all going?
Well, as China's economy and global output surpasses the United States, the opportunities are going to be phenomenally even better, I think, for careers for those who have expertise in the Chinese language as well as expertise in other areas. Look, this is just a snapshot in time, and I'm going to quote the Bible, this too will pass. Right now there's a little bit of, China bashing going on. It's very frustrating to me because so much of the dialogue is based not on fact, but just on pandering to certain aspects of our society that sometimes aren't the best. And we're gonna grow out of this. We have to. And there will be phenomenal opportunities across the board. I mean, about a third of the world right now speaks Mandarin. And so the opportunities are only going to be amplified and only get greater, especially as China's economic output continues to grow, as it will, and we all know it will.
One of the exciting things for me about coming to this conference is seeing that you are reaching out to children all over the country, different socioeconomic backgrounds. It's not just, I have a friend, Goldman Sachs, former president, John Thornton. His son is a fluent Chinese speaker, began learning Chinese at an elite high school and spent time studying there. You see this happening in the captains of industry, their children, they're looking ahead, they're saying, geez, I want my child to have the ability to learn Chinese. But we're also seeing that other children may not be so fortunate or having opportunities because of the work that many of you are doing here today. But, and we have our president's granddaughter learning Chinese, very famously. So people see this. I think my sense from being in the country back now since October, talking to a lot of people, is that there's a recognition in America that China is going to be very important for us. We need to find ways of working together. Let's invest in that. There's a demand growing around the country. And oftentimes the problem now is supply. How do we get enough teachers?
John, just from the political perspective, I'd just like to throw this in there because back at the time when we were having to debate Jackson Vanik every June, I think, and engage in all kinds of China bashing on the U.S. House floor and the U.S. Senate floor, there was wisdom in the idea of promoting permanent normal trade relations with China. But as you remember, there was all this dialogue about all these things in China that aren't happening that are similar to how we do things in the United States from all different perspectives. And the thing that I said at that time, and I'll say it again, and I'll say it till I'm blue in the face, you tell me one relationship you've ever had in your life that you improved upon by walking away from it.
That's true.
This relationship.
Yeah. All right. I agree.
And the other thing I'd just like to leave on everybody's minds is with two global superpowers, the United States and China, can you imagine the great good that we could accomplish together if it's, starting with North Korea?
Right.
Everybody knows. You can have your six-party talks, but the only party that really matters when it comes to Korea really is China, because 80-90% of their food and energy come from China. The other thing I'd like to say is just that if the United States and China harness themselves together to push toward other things like dealing with our climate change issues or dealing with world peace, it becomes imminently more accomplishable with those two entities working together side by side than at odds with one another.
Very well said. I'd like to second that. No, clearly, if we approach each other with respect and with the sincere attempt to understand one another, this is hard. It's not easy. Americans often think, well, everybody should understand us. It's not easy. We're a very, very complex country with a long history. It's very different from many other countries, and we're not easy to understand. China's not easy to understand either.
John, could I share a brief experience that I think would illustrate this point? A few years ago, we had the opportunity to host the U.S. National Governors Association, in Salt Lake City, much like we're hosting you all here today. And so you had the 50 governors come and spend a couple days here. At the same time, and not just a coincidence, it was intentional, there was a delegation from China of provincial governors. So they came and also decided that they would hold their meeting at the same time here in Salt Lake City that the U.S. governors were meeting. At that meeting, the Chinese provincial governors were invited to go to the governor's mansion. And they were hosted there, official government-to-government hosting. And part of their welcome, you can imagine these long line of black cars pulling up to the governor's mansion. And part of their welcome as they were coming out of their vehicles and walking into the governor's mansion was a group of Utah school children, kindergarten, first and second graders, so 4, 5, and 6 years old, singing to them in Mandarin Chinese as they were coming out. And these governors the shock on their face, and then to stop the singing and have these children start talking to them in Mandarin Chinese. This had more to do with building relationships than anything else that could have been done. No summit, no conference, no meeting, nothing was as impactful as that was. And what it did for me is it turned on a light for me where I realized we began this language program as an economic imperative, but what it really is a human imperative.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. These are great investments to make. Actually, it reminds me, I traveled with my family throughout Western China as a guest of the Chinese government. And I had 2 little girls. One of them was a very good singer, and she learned how to sing Mo Li Hua. Mm-hmm. And at every stop along the way, at the end of dinner, I said, Camille, would you mind singing Mo Li Hua for the officials here? And so she dutifully did that. And then the last stop, the last dinner was in Lhasa. And I was about to turn to her, and she said, Daddy, I don't want to sing Mo Li Hua anymore. Anyway.
You said, what song do you want to sing?
I said, you're off tonight. This is your vacation night. But that's a great icebreaker.
If you don't mind, I'll pick up on what you were just saying about, I'm resident in Washington, D.C., where a lot of the tensions that we're all talking about here that are plaguing the economic relationship that we had so much hope in for being a stabilizing factor in U.S.-China relations. Now economic tensions are on the rise, and this emanates from Washington, a lot of misinformation, and is characterizing the U.S.-China relationship in a very negative way. And so I just want to reinforce what you were just saying, that we aren't talking about an economic relationship that's so strong and so important. We're talking about 2 countries with people, and building these people-to-people ties through language exchange, cultural exchange, just exposure to one another, I think is more important than ever, because I don't see these tensions in the economic and commercial relationship subsiding in the short term. And so we need to rely on educating people in the United States and in China on the importance of a positive aspect of this relationship, because our countries are so consequential to the world and like you said, to global issues, now more than ever.
It's interesting. You have, this relationship has evolved so rapidly over the last 3-4 decades. It shouldn't be surprising or shocking to us that we've reached a point where some issues need to be addressed and resolved. It's one could hope for perhaps slightly less acrimonious atmosphere for it, but I agree with you, this too shall pass. Wenxi?
Yeah, I was going to say, it's really interesting for me too, and this is not a commercial time for a company that I have firm belief in. But, in the past, people tend to look at country-to-country kind of relationships through pure government kind of lens, right? Government to government. But again, like today's world is so interconnected. And then, with, WTO and other sort of, global trade-related mechanisms, that business and business connections become stronger and stronger. But now, what I'm seeing is that like a company like ours, VIP Kid, it truly is built on this business model, is people-to-people exchange, right? It's teachers from one country teach another country's students, whether it's Chinese or English. Again, Chinese or English is just a tool. What we teach is actually math, science, confidence, and a lot of other subjects. But through that teaching, I mean, what's really heartening for me to see is that you would have rural teachers from Utah State. We have more than 2,000 teachers from Utah, by the way, who teach Chinese kids English. So from that experience, they learn so much about China. I mean, that's not something that requires that they have an advanced Chinese degree or something, or study abroad or spending some time in China, but they just learn a lot. They know about Chinese holidays. They all know about Chinese Lunar New Year's. They know about all the latest funny languages kids would talk that I don't even understand, because they actually interact with kids on a daily basis, and vice versa. And then that triggers their curiosity and interest to know about China. So now, because of that demand and interest in learning about China, we have opened up lots of new programs to help American teachers learn about Chinese culture, right? Why do 3 generations live in one household, for example? Why do Chinese people or kids always have a bottle to drink water from? Those kind of questions is perfect for people-to-people kind of diplomacy, which I really see as the anchor for a future better and constructive kind of relationship, because everything needs to be bottom-up, developed from the grassroots level.
And John, she and I had breakfast this morning. We were talking about this wonderful company that she now works with, and I think that things like that are going to do more for diplomacy and the bilateral relationship than any government program ever could. As I talk about the businesses that we do over in China, I know we get frustrated and concerned with some of the things that we care very deeply about, human rights and other things. But the best way to impact that is to engage. The best way to impact and to try to help mutually understand one another is to engage. And the best thing for the entire world going forward is for the United States and China to engage and to work together.
When she said something just a second ago that I think is really important, there's a lot of things that are happening at the grassroots around the country. I have a friend named Jim Fallows who writes for The Atlantic. He's got a new book coming out. He and his wife spent 3 years traveling around the U.S. in a little single-engine plane. And he says the story from America really is positive. People are engaged, they're doing things. And it's true with U.S.-China relations as well. There are programs, student-organized programs, community-organized programs, things happening in every corner of the country. Those are very positive things. We can be optimistic as a result.
I want to know how I can get more of my neighbors to work for VIP Kid. One of my neighbors does work for VIP Kid, and her light is always on very early in the morning because, of course, that is when she's teaching her Chinese students, and she loves it as a job.
Yeah.
How are you guys recruiting?
So it's interesting because, the first, I would say, we as a company, we're still really young. We officially launched the program, the company services in 2014. So it's only been a little bit over 4 years. And I would say we didn't do any marketing, any teacher recruiting until late last year. So it was purely word of mouth. So a lot of teachers, they have their own online social media groups, a lot of moms groups, a lot of moms who used to be teachers. So it really grew, I would say, organically. So that's why you see there are certain states that actually have higher concentration of teachers. So Utah is one example. Texas is one example. Florida is one example. Some from Arizona as well. But starting this year, we are doing much more targeted marketing recruiting. So probably For example, if you go on the job sites, you'll see a lot of posting about teaching for VIP kids. It's all flexible hours, do it whenever you want, wherever you want. That's also, again, this is not really relevant to today's conversation, but, what the future of employment or workforce is going to look like for this country. I learned that 1/3 of Americans actually are considered independent workers, which means they don't work in a traditional corporate setting. They have their own gigs, right? So Lyft, Uber, all these companies, TaskRabbit, and people just do different things and then make a living out of it. They actually prefer that. I'm not advocating one way is better than the other, but it is a new phenomenon that we have to embrace.
So we're going to wrap up. I'd just like to leave us with a final thought, which is, we have 350,000 Chinese students studying on American campuses. We have our students learning Chinese. I've recently met a young man who's created a program to try to bring those Americans and Chinese together on campuses. There are programs, the American Mandarin Society, and Nat Ahrens is here today. That's designed to encourage people to use their Chinese after they've come back from China, to maintain it as they in their work careers. There are a lot of these kinds of issues. To what level of Chinese should you aspire so that you don't forget it? I used to have fluent Japanese, and not anymore. It's been too long. So bringing the communities together here in the United States, this is a big opportunity. I salute all of the teachers here again, as I did last night. I thank my fellow panelists who've done a great job sharing your experiences and insights. Please join me in giving them a round of applause. Okay.